The ocean produces more than half the oxygen we breathe. It regulates climate, produces lots of yummy seafood, and creates endless recreational opportunities. Did you know that less than 2% of the ocean is protected? And we've already lost 90% of the largest fish. And we continue to watch the decline of coral reefs. On Vancouver Island, the coastal environment is extremely unique. We wanted to look into vessel traffic in Victoria to get a better understanding of the implications and effects that may be imposed upon our coastal environments. Bob Crooks, a regional program specialist at MCTS, which stands for Marine Communications and Traffic Services, was kind enough to give us a better understanding of what goes on within the harbor as well as along the west coast.
So what traffic does, what vessel traffic does, is we know who all these vessels are. We know where they're going. We know that this guy is going like that. We know that this guy is going like that.
Bob explains that MCTS monitors traffic and ensures that no two ships collide. There's a rule in place called a collision regulation, which Bob will explain.
So there are laws in place. They're called collision regulations. So collision regulation says that that's my ship going that way, that's my ship going that way. Now, clearly, I'm going to hit that person if I'm on this boat. And if I'm on this boat, I know I'm going to be hit by that person. So every ship has a red light and a green light, right? So that tells you which way the ship is going. If you're looking at a ship and you see a red light, then you know it's the left side, or port side of the vessel. There's a guy with a green light there. There's a guy with a red light there. So the law says, the way the rules of the road for ships are, is if I see your red light, I have to go behind you.
Okay.
If I see your green light, then I get to go ahead. So one is called the give-way vessel, and one is called the stand-on. So the stand-on vessel is just supposed to keep going in the one direction. And then if he does his job, then this person can go, oh, okay, I see now. I see his red light. I have to go behind him.
These laws in place seem to be working, because within MCTS domain, there have only been minor accidents since the collision regulation was implemented. Since the harbor and surrounding waters are often busy, especially in the summer months, we are curious as to whom else had authority and what role they played in all of this.
Master. That's Transport Canada. It's on the water, it's Transport Canada. It's on land, the Harbour Authority has some powers or something. As a council or as a group. The Harbour Master works a lot with local communities in the harbour so that traffic moves in a predictable way. The whole point of traffic management, so vessel traffic, is to create predictability. What looks like chaos is actually, to people on the water who know what they're doing, there's actually rules there. There's actually structure. When you're standing on land and you're not a mariner, and when you look at the waterways, it doesn't appear to be structure. It's just a vast open parking lot and people are moving.
Organizations such as the Harbour Authority and Transportation Canada are working together on and off land to ensure a safe environment for all boaters.
Over time, these lessons have been learned over time. So there's some kind of propagating event, either an actual accident or something that was so close to being a natural disaster.
Yeah, like a near miss, I guess.
Correct. So we review them, we investigate them, we look at lessons that we could learn from that. And so pilots are very, very well trained. They have a certification process that is very, very lengthy. When you first get hired as a pilot, there's a series of exams you have to pass, and then you can only work on smaller ships, and then over time you build up certifications, and then eventually you can get an unlimited ticket. You can go in any size of vessel. So there's a lot. So the safety measures that we have in place for vessels going in and out of a harbor so vessel traffic is here. So our job is to look at the waterways. Our job is to look at the movements of all vessels as a whole, and making sure that all the vessels are acting appropriately. And when they're not, we're supposed to challenge them. We work with other agencies to provide information to them, so that way, we know when the pilot times are going to be, so we know when to expect the vessels, we know where they're going, so we know what routes they should be taking, we know if there's any special circumstance on board the vessels, because they've been pre-cleared before they come into Canadian territories. They have to tell us who they are, where they're going, their ETA to the pilot station, pardon me. Any special thing about the vessel, like if they're missing an anchor. So our job the MCTS job is to look at the movements as a whole, make sure that everything is in place, and then we see you all the way to the dock. Transport Canada's role is to inspect your vessel to make sure that you are safe to transit Canadian waters. They're also the ones that clear you to come into Canadian waters based on the information you provide. It's on the honor system. But there's no point in lying, because when you get in, if you're lying, then there's fines. They could detain your vessel. Transport Canada just makes sure that the ship itself, they have domain over the individual ships. Are they safe? And the harbour master in Victoria says, are you using my harbour in a way? And their job is to not only make sure that you're using the harbour safely, but to look at rules and regulations in the harbour to make it more safe for people. Mm-hmm. Or you look at a rule that's not working and then change it or get rid of it, right? Yeah. So they do that. That's what Transport Canada's job is. The pilot's job is to make sure that there's somebody on board the vessel that understands the navigating system on the coast. So they're part of the safety of the movements of the coast. So is it successful? Well, nothing's ever 100% successful, I suppose. Vessel traffic was formed really on this coast. We've had since 1975. We've had vessel traffic regulation on this coast. And it was the accident that started it all was a Russian freighter hit a BC ferry in Active Pass and sunk the ferry. But every vessel, all of the water in British Columbia is monitored by Vessel Traffic Services. Every vessel in these waters is reporting to us.
So, from my understanding, there are many laws, rules, and regulations in place to ensure a safe environment. Things such as the collision regulation, mandatory training and certification for pilots, as well as distributing fines to boaters who do not follow the rules, each contribute to mitigating against accidents. Like Bob said, MCTS is constantly looking to improve their rules and regulations, which they hope will prevent future accidents.
The largest vessel that goes into the harbor, really, there's some Coast Guard ships that our base is right at the entrance, mm-hmm. and then there's the Coho. Yeah. It's the only other big ship, and even the Coho had an incident a while ago. When because they have to back off the dock and go down towards the Johnson Street Bridge in order to turn around. So they were backing off the dock. It was a high wind day. So as you can imagine, a ship is mostly out of the water, so you're affected strongly by the wind. And so they backed off of their dock, went all the way down towards the Johnson Street Bridge, so it's the big Blue Bridge. And then when they came to a near stop, the wind was coming from the south, and it started to push them towards, that big hotel right downtown, just off of Johnson Street?
Yeah.
Well, there's a dock right at the bottom. And it started to push the ship towards the dock, and so they put forward power on to try and, as soon as they drifted to a stop, they started putting forward power on, but it wasn't enough. And so there were some people on the dock, and all they saw was the back end of the Coho coming at them, and the propellers were shifting, and there was a big wake coming off the back as it was trying to build up enough power to send the ship forward. So it almost swamped the dock, and there were people on it trying to get off the dock, but the wind.
Yeah.
So
I guess wind is a big concern, because obviously with BC ferries, when there's wind, they don't run, but if ships are coming, they can't just...
Correct. BC ferry stops running when the wind is really high and the water's really bad, not because the ships aren't capable of it, but because it's not, if you got a bunch of sick passengers, it's just bad PR.
Not really fun.
It's not really fun. You have to worry about people falling down, possible injury. You have to worry about vehicles on the vehicle deck moving around and being damaged. It's about mitigation. It's not that ships
so it's more about the people and
it's about their customers.
Okay. Interesting.
The ships are perfectly capable of being in those weathers. But my original point was that vessel traffic as a group, Transport Canada with their inspections of vessels, foreign and domestic, pilots being on all foreign vessels, all these are different layers of the same concern, which is how does everybody use the waterway, how do they share the waterway, and how do we create as much safety as possible in a world where nothing is 100% guaranteed. We're always monitoring that work, we're always trying to be better, we're always reviewing every incident that we have. Whenever there is a minor incident or a breakdown, we're always looking at these things to find out, well, here's what went right, but the important part is, did anything go wrong? Once the incident is done, when we realize that there was really nothing that MCTS could do, then that falls on Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board, which are not the same thing. They sound the same, but they're not. One is an investigative unit that Transportation Safety Board looks at things that happened, and they have to find out why. The other incidents that happen, not really the Victoria waterfront, but there's a lot of scrap iron that leaves Victoria. So there's a scrap plant. If you go past the Johnson Street Bridge and around the corner from the Bay Street Bridge, there's a big scrap plant there. And they load scrap onto a barge and we send it down to the States for smelting, right? Because if you want good steel, you have to have some impurities in it, so they just scrap up a bunch of cars and take it down. Well, you have a flat barge like this, and you pile it full of, it's just a flat barge, there's really nothing on it. Usually there's just a little rail on 3 sides. You pile it full of scrap. Well, if it's raining, water's going to run down through the scrap, and it's going to stick on stuff, right? And that barge is going to start getting heavier and heavier because of the rain. And then if it starts to list a little bit, then you got a big pile of junk. And they're not just loading on whole cars, they actually chop the car up. And if it starts to shift, now the barge starts to lift a little more, and eventually what has happened probably, well, maybe once every couple of years, one of the barges flips over. Now, barges are watertight, so they're not going to sink, but all the contents fall off. And now they have to, and there's nothing wrong with the barge, there's physically nothing wrong with the barge. Now they have to tow it upside down somewhere where they can get a big crane to flip it back over again. But in the meantime, you've lost all that scrap that's gone down to the bottom.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, Bob. So 2 minutes ago, you just told me there were no major incidents.
But there's been no major incidents, no major loss of life, no major ship collision.
We asked Bob if he knew how that impacted the physical environment within the harbor, and this is what he had to say.
What that means ecologically, I don't know. But so for Victoria, I don't know. I could never speak to what the impact of that would be. Actually, I would have not a clue.
Yeah.
But it can't be good. It can't be good in the long term.
Yeah, well, no duh, Bob. Dumping a massive barge of scrap into the ocean will have detrimental effects on the ecosystem and wildlife in those areas. At the beginning of this interview, it sounded like MTCS, Transport Canada, and Harbour Authority really had their ducks in a row, mitigating and preparing for incidents such as a barge that's flipped over. Yet, when that happened, nothing was done. The barge flipped, leaving tons of iron on the ocean floor, and life went on. We could tell that the environment was not on Bob's list of priorities, especially after he explained to us what kind of fuel the large ships used.
When they're at sea, there's different grades of fuel. When you're at sea, there's what they call heavy bulk, which is cheap to buy. Basically, you pump it out of the ground, you sift out the sand, and you can burn it.
Okay.
And it requires almost no processing. It's called bunker C. And there's almost no processing involved outside of filtering it, but which is the cheapest fuel you can buy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at a large ship, they carry bunker C on board. And when they're in mid-ocean, as soon as they leave the 12-mile limit, boom, they open up those engines and they just start pumping in bunker C, and there's black smoke. There's a lot of black smoke.
So, maybe they think they're being environmentally conscious when they wait 12 miles until they start pumping black smoke into the air. But we all know that whether they're along the coast or in open water, they're still contributing to air pollution and the overall degradation of the environment.
And that all has to do with the fact that Canada as a country regulates the use of its waterways and regulates the movements of vessels.
I think we need to explain to Bob that even though Canada has regulations in place, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're always effective, especially when it comes down to the environment. So, you know what? I'll give Bob this. They're doing a good job at keeping boaters and the public safe within the harbor, but there's not much effort going into the protection or conservation of the coastal environment. There needs to be more effort and research put into mitigating and preventing not only hazards that impact humans, but those that impact the coastal environment.
Looks, for want of a better word, it just looks free-flowing. It's like nobody's following any rules at all.